Part 2. Break with Freud and the Beginning of the Descent. The Meeting of Two Giants. At the dawn of the 20th century, psychology was still a young and fragile science. Few dared to study the unconscious, that vast, invisible territory where dreams, instincts, and forgotten memories reside. But one man had already thrown open the gates: Sigmund Freud. By the early 1900s, Freud's theory of psychoanalysis was shaking the intellectual world. He argued that our behavior is shaped by unconscious desires, particularly sexual ones. Repressed instincts, he believed, surfaced in dreams, neuroses, and slips of the tongue. For many, Freud was a revolutionary. For others, he was scandalous. When Carl Jung encountered Freud's writings, he felt a spark. Here, finally, was a man unafraid to look into the abyss. Here was someone who, like Jung, believed that the unconscious held the key to human life. Their first meeting in 1907 became legendary. Jung traveled from Switzerland to Vienna, eager to meet the man he already admired as a genius. The two men sat down together in Freud's study and spoke for 13 hours straight. It was as if two explorers, each carrying fragments of the same mysterious map, had finally found each other. Freud saw in Jung something he desperately needed: a young, ambitious ally from outside the Jewish community. In those days, many critics dismissed Freud's work as a Jewish science. Having Jung as a respected Swiss scholar, son of a Protestant pastor, gave Freud's movement both credibility and reach. For his part, Jung saw in Freud a mentor, even a father figure. Jung's own father had died when he was young, leaving him with unanswered questions about faith and weakness. Freud, strong and decisive, seemed to fill that void. The bond was powerful. Jung became Freud's chosen heir, the crown prince of psychoanalysis. Together they worked, corresponded, and dreamed of building a new science of the mind. But beneath the friendship, cracks were already forming. A clash of visions. The heart of their disagreement lay in how each understood the unconscious. For Freud, the unconscious was a dark cellar of repressed instincts, mostly sexual drives and forbidden desires. For Jung, the unconscious was much more than that. He saw it as a vast landscape, filled with ancient symbols, archetypes, and spiritual truths that connected all of humanity. Freud believed dreams were wish fulfillment, disguised expressions of hidden sexual urges. Jung believed dreams were messages from the unconscious guiding the individual toward growth, transformation, and wholeness. The difference was not small, it was seismic. Where Freud saw reduction, breaking human experience down to base instincts, Jung saw expansion. He wanted to unite psychology with mythology, religion, and art. The conflict came to a head around 1912, when Jung published Psychology of the Unconscious, later revised as Symbols of Transformation. In it, he broke from Freud's sexual theory and argued that the unconscious was symbolic, mythic, and collective. Freud was furious. To him, Jung's ideas were dangerous heresies that could undermine the entire psychoanalytic movement. Jung, in turn, felt suffocated by Freud's rigid dogma. What had begun as a passionate friendship turned into one of the greatest intellectual divorces of the 20th century. The collapse of a father-son bond. The break with Freud was not just professional, it was personal. For Jung, losing Freud was like losing a father all over again. Their letters reveal how deeply Jung had invested in the relationship. He admired Freud's brilliance, but also feared his authority. When the rupture finally came, Jung felt both liberated and devastated. In 1913, Jung resigned as president of the International Psychoanalytic Association. He walked away from the role of Freud's successor, but he did not walk into peace. Instead, he walked straight into chaos. The break with Freud shattered Jung's outer world, his career, his reputation, his intellectual community. But it also cracked open his inner world. Without Freud's framework to contain him, Jung was left alone with the full force of his own unconscious, and that force was immense. The storm within. Soon after his split with Freud, Jung began to experience what he later described as a confrontation with the unconscious. It started with visions. In 1913, as Europe trembled on the brink of war, Jung had a terrifying image. He saw a monstrous flood sweeping across the continent, drowning countless people. He saw rivers of blood, devastation, and death. At first, he feared he was losing his mind. But when World War I broke out the next year, Jung wondered if his vision had been prophetic. More visions followed. He saw himself traveling through deserts, meeting wise old men and dangerous serpents. He heard voices that seemed both within and beyond him. By day, he was still a respected doctor in Zurich, treating patients, lecturing, and living with his wife, Emma, and their children. By night, he was descending into worlds that defied all logic. Jung worried he was going insane. In fact, he confessed later that he kept a revolver by his side, fearing that at any moment he might be consumed by madness. But instead of fleeing, he chose to confront what was happening. He decided that these visions were not just hallucinations, they were encounters with the unconscious itself, and he, as both doctor and explorer, had a duty to record them. The method of active imagination. To engage with his visions, Jung developed a technique he called active imagination. Unlike Freud's free association, where patients spoke whatever came to mind, active imagination involved entering into dialogue with the images of the unconscious. When Jung saw a figure in his visions, a wise man, a warrior, a demon, he did not dismiss it as fantasy. He treated it as real, as a part of the psyche with its own voice and truth. He spoke with these figures, argued with them, listened to them. Sometimes the encounters were terrifying, other times they were enlightening. Always they were intense. This was not therapy in the modern sense. It was a descent into myth, a personal odyssey. Jung compared it to alchemy, the ancient art of turning base metals into gold. Except here, the alchemy was psychological, the transformation of fear into wisdom, shadow into light. Entering the Red Book. To preserve these encounters, Jung began writing them down in notebooks. Later, he copied them into a massive red leather-bound volume, carefully illustrated with paintings and calligraphy. This became the Red Book, Liber Novus. The Red Book was no ordinary diary. It was a work of art, a sacred manuscript. Jung filled it with intricate mandalas, mythic scenes, and dialogues with figures like Philemon, an old winged man who became his spiritual guide. In its pages, Jung wrestled with demons, spoke with gods, and navigated landscapes of fire and darkness. He painted serpents and castles, heroes and monsters, all drawn from the depths of his psyche. For Jung, the Red Book was not madness, but meaning. It was proof that the unconscious was alive, autonomous, and filled with wisdom. But he also feared that others saw it would think him insane. For this reason, he kept it private, showing it only to a few trusted friends. Europe in flames, Jung in shadows. While Jung battled his inner world, the outer world collapsed into war. From 1914 to 1918, Europe was consumed by World War I, the very devastation Jung had foreseen in his visions. The war reinforced his belief that the collective unconscious was real, and that his personal descent was connected to humanity's larger crisis. Just as individuals had shadows, so too did nations. The violence consuming Europe was not just political, it was the eruption of repressed instincts and collective demons. Jung felt that his own struggle mirrored the world's struggle. His confrontation with his inner chaos was part of the same pattern that was tearing civilization apart. To heal humanity, one had to begin with the soul. The fear of madness. During these years, Jung walked a dangerous line. He later admitted that he often feared for his sanity. His visions were so vivid, so overwhelming, that he wondered if he was crossing into psychosis. But there was a difference. Unlike patients consumed by hallucinations, Jung could maintain a dual awareness. Part of him was fully immersed in the visions. Another part observed, recorded, and analyzed. This balance, immersion without total loss of self, allowed him to survive the descent. It also gave him insights that no one else had. He came to believe that madness and creativity were closely linked, that the line between Introduction, the descent into the self. Every great thinker has faced a moment when the world outside no longer makes sense, and the only place left to explore is within. For Carl Gustav Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, that moment came not in triumph, but in crisis. Outwardly, Jung was a man of reputation, achievement, and respect. Inwardly, however, he was being torn apart by forces he could neither fully understand nor control. The story of Jung is not just the story of a doctor or a scholar. It is the story of a man who wrestled with the deepest shadows of the human soul, who dared to descend into the abyss of his own unconscious mind, and who came back with visions and insights that would change psychology, philosophy, and even spirituality forever. At the center of this story lies a mysterious book, the Red Book, a massive hand-painted journal where Jung recorded his most terrifying visions, conversations with inner figures, and mythic encounters with what he described as his demons. For decades, the book remained hidden, locked away in secrecy, because Jung himself feared the world would think him mad. And perhaps, in a way, he was. But in his madness, he found meaning. This is the story of that journey. Carl Jung's battle with his inner demons, the secret story of the Red Book. Childhood shadows. Two souls in one body. Carl Gustav Jung was born on July 26, 1875, in the small Swiss village of Kessville on the shores of Lake Constance. His family belonged to a long line of Protestant clergymen. His father, Paul Jung, was a pastor, while Emilie was a woman with a mysterious and sometimes troubled spirit. From the beginning, Jung felt like he was not just one person, but two. He later described his early life as marked by a strange division. On one hand, he was a normal boy, playing, studying, and learning the ways of the world. On the other hand, he felt like there was an ancient man living inside him, a wise, distant presence that seemed to know things far beyond the boy's years. He called these two sides personality number 1 and personality number 2. Personality number 1 was the everyday Carl, the son of a pastor, the schoolboy, the friend. Personality number 2 was something deeper, a mysterious spiritual figure that felt connected to eternity, as though Jung were not just living in the present, but also carrying the memories of ages past. This split would haunt him throughout his life. It was both a gift and a curse. It gave him an extraordinary sensitivity to the world of dreams, symbols, and the unconscious, but it also left him feeling alienated, as if he never truly belonged to the world of ordinary people. Jung's family life was complicated. His father was kind but weak, struggling with doubts about his own faith. His mother suffered from psychological difficulties and was sometimes confined to her bedroom, which Jung experienced as both absence and mystery. At night, he claimed he saw visions of strange figures which frightened and fascinated him. One night, he had a dream that would mark him forever. He dreamt of a dark, underground chamber where he encountered a powerful figure seated on a throne. This dream, filled with awe and terror, was his first taste of the mythic images that would later dominate his work. For young Jung, the line between dreams and reality was thin. The world of the unconscious was not just imagination. It was alive, filled with presences, voices, and images that seemed to carry their own truth. A solitary child. Jung was not a typical child. He often preferred solitude over social games, exploring forests, rivers, and ancient ruins near his home. He collected stones, carved figures, and built little sanctuaries in nature. These activities were not mere play. For Jung, they were rituals, expressions of an inner life that demanded form. He was especially fascinated by symbols. He recalled carving a tiny figure of a man and hiding it inside a pencil case, together with a little stone he painted with colors. He treated these objects as sacred, as though they were vessels of a secret power. Looking back, he saw in these actions the beginnings of his lifelong engagement with archetypes and the collective unconscious. In school, Jung was intelligent but often distracted. He disliked rote learning and rigid rules. Instead, he followed his curiosity into philosophy, history, and mythology. Even as a teenager, he was drawn to questions of meaning, existence, and the nature of the soul. But his curiosity was mixed with fear. He often felt the presence of death. When he was only 12 years old, he fainted at school after being bullied. At first, the incident seemed purely physical, but Jung realized something deeper was happening. His body had forced him to withdraw from the world, to retreat into inner exploration. For months, he stayed home, reading and daydreaming, wandering inside his imagination. It was here that Jung's pattern emerged. Whenever outer life became unbearable, he turned inward. This was not an escape, but a descent. He was learning, unconsciously, to enter the depths of the psyche. Faith and doubt. Religion was an unavoidable part of Jung's upbringing. With a pastor for a father and a long lineage of clergy in his family, faith was supposed to be his inheritance. But from a young age, he struggled with it. One of his earliest spiritual crises came when he was about 11 years old. He was preparing for his first communion, an important moment in Christian tradition. But instead of joy, he felt nothing. No presence of God, no reassurance of faith. He later described sitting in church, surrounded by holy rituals, and feeling only emptiness. This left him shaken. If God was real, why was he silent? If religion was true, why did it feel so hollow? Yet at the same time, Jung had powerful religious experiences of his own. He described a vision of God defecating on a cathedral, a shocking image that horrified him as a boy, but filled him with an overwhelming sense of awe. To Jung, this was not blasphemy, but revelation. It meant that God was not confined to human morality or church teachings. God was vast, terrible, creative, and destructive, all at once. This paradox, the emptiness of organized religion versus the living power of personal vision, would follow Jung for life. It became part of his psychological theory, the idea that true spirituality arises not from dogma, but from direct encounters with the numinous, the awe-inspiring forces of the unconscious. The young scholar. Despite his struggles, Jung pushed forward academically. He entered the University of Basel in 1895 to study medicine and soon discovered his passion for psychiatry. At the time, psychiatry was a young and controversial field caught between medicine and philosophy. Jung was drawn to it because it dealt with the mysteries of the mind, dreams, madness, hidden desires, and the strange ways the unconscious shaped behavior. He felt that through psychiatry, he could unite his interest in science with his fascination for myth and spirituality. During his early studies, he read widely, from Kant to Goethe, from alchemy to ancient mythology. He also discovered the writings of Sigmund Freud, the rising figure of psychoanalysis. At first, Jung admired him immensely, seeing in him a bold pioneer who was willing to explore the forbidden depths of sexuality and the unconscious. But while Freud focused on the drives of sex and repression, Jung sensed that there was more, a deeper layer of symbols, myths, and archetypes that connected individuals to something greater than themselves. This tension between Freud's rational psychoanalysis and Jung's spiritual imagination would eventually lead to one of the greatest intellectual breakups in history. But before that, Jung would have to face an even greater struggle, the one within himself. Closing of Part 1. By the time Jung reached his early 30s, he was a rising star in psychiatry. He was married, had children, and was on track to become Freud's chosen successor. Outwardly, his life was a success. Inwardly, however, he was being torn apart by forces he could neither fully understand nor control. This was the beginning of the battle with his inner demons, and it would give birth to the most secret and mysterious work he ever created, the Red Book.